Dear people of God, our history is marred by oppression, by the enslavement of those who differ from us and the forces of racism that attack human dignity. The sin of racism is woven into our lives and our cultures in small and great ways, in things done and things left undone. As followers of Christ, we reject racism and the oppression of other human beings. In building Christ's beloved community, we must strive to love all people, respect all people, and work for the good of all people. We must stand alongside God's children of every race, language, and culture and work together as agents of justice, peace, and reconciliation. And so in the assurance of our forgiveness, let us bow our hearts before God and humbly confess our sins, our participation in racism, our privilege based on racism, and our perpetuation of racism. God the Father, you freed your people from slavery in Egypt, yet the legacy of slavery deforms our lives today. Have mercy on us. God the Son, you prayed that all would be united in your love and service, yet the divisions among us rend your body. Have mercy on us. God the Holy Spirit, you inspire us to live peaceably with all, yet the stain of genocide and internment mars our striving for justice. Have mercy on us. We have harmed one another in the earth through negligence, greed, and self-interest. Have mercy on us. We have failed to condemn discrimination that leads to unrest. Have mercy on us. We have decried violence while overlooking inequity and frustration from which it rises. Have mercy on us. We have practiced injustice for economic and political gain and have oppressed others to make a false peace. Have mercy upon us. We have sought comfort and advantage for ourselves at the cost of injustice for others. Have mercy on us. We have welcomed solace over conflict and ignored the cries of those harmed by our comfort. Have mercy on us. We have grasped for this world's goods and been arrogant towards those who have little. Have mercy on us. We have not shared the good things we've been given and blamed the poor for their poverty. Have mercy on us. We've been fearful and distrustful of those who are different from us. Have mercy on us. We have divided ourselves from others and refused to listen to or believe their experience. Have mercy on us. We've been indifferent to the pain and suffering of our sisters and brothers. Have mercy on us. We have held in contempt those who need our help and not loved them with our whole hearts. Have mercy on us. We've been self-satisfied in our privilege and denied our oppression of others. Have mercy on us. We have preferred order over justice and isolation over the struggle for peace. Have mercy on us. We have quietly held good intentions and kept silent the message of reconciliation. Have mercy on us. We have failed to act with courage for the sake of love. Have mercy on us. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Amen. That's a tough litany. That'll probably show up in church. Maybe on Restorative Justice Sunday, which happens to be Christ the King Sunday. Okay, thank you all for gathering. Here we are towards the end. I have to, I'm hoping you're enjoying this curriculum. I really am hoping so. I know in some ways it's easy, and in other ways I feel like it has a really great opportunity to just go deeper. Through some participation. So what I want us to do first is have a look. If you've got your journal with you, there's a little spot. The curriculum really asks us to consider whether we trust lies or not. And so on page 39, there's a section presented about whether or not we've internalized oppressive messages. And they ask us, honestly, to put true or false next to each statement. And I want you to know that we could fly right through this and probably mark every single one of these things as false. But I think the real question I would ask is, what does your spirit tell you when you hear this? Like, what does your core tell you, not what does your head tell you? Because that's an opportunity really to go deep. Sometimes I think we go right to our head when we're uncomfortable, and that takes us away from really integrating ourselves around something, if that makes sense. So maybe the question to do, I mean, we can go through these. I would actually like to go through them one at a time, if you don't mind, because there's a small group here and I think we can do it. The first, we're saying whether we think this is true or false. And when I say think, I mean, I don't know that think is the word. I think trust. I mean, where does your trust say? Kids who get F's in school are not as smart as the ones who get A's. Maybe what I'd love to do is, if you want to speak to any one of these, just put your hand up. Darlene?
My work as a teacher and as a counselor and as a psychologist with gifted and talented students has helped me to understand, not only intellectually, but from an experiential relationship with these students, that oftentimes the smartest kids will get F's because they're bored, because they're into something and keep going and going and going on it, and they're really learning for the sake of learning rather than for getting the grade. So a big false for me.
Tim?
Often we think of athletes, especially African-American athletes, as not being very smart. But when you see how they control their bodies on a basketball court or on the football field, how they're able to see what's coming at them, that shows to me that they are not stupid people. They just have a different kind of outlook.
Different ability. I think it's a different ability than those kids that can automatically make A's just easily, hardly. It's so simple for them. But every child, if you look at them closely, they have their own personal talents that are different from everyone else. And so you can't put them into little sacks and little bags. And these are the F kids, and these are the B kids, and these are the C kids. It's hard to do that and painful for the kids.
Yeah. Darlene?
There is no one type of smartness, no one kind of intellectual ability. Our intelligence is made up of pockets of different kinds of abilities, and the school system usually only taps into some of those. Yeah. So we're only grading those parts of our intelligence that apply to school. When you give an intellectual ability test, an IQ test, there are a dozen different tests that measure that particular intelligence component, and then you put them all together for a composite score. And then you also get the different scores on the different kinds of intelligence. So smart is not just smart.
Susan?
The other thing is that there are children who have learning disabilities, and that may cause them initially to get very poor grades. It doesn't mean that they're not smart. It just means that they learn in a different way, and they have to learn how to adjust themselves and their thinking to be successful in our world. And I think sometimes the school districts, the whole school system is too rigid and is not, I don't know what to say, not responsive enough to individual students and their strengths and weaknesses.
That's fair. I think cognitively I'm with all of you. I do have to tell you, having taught at a private school, having taught math, there is a ton of grade inflation. And so I struggle with this a little bit, honestly, because students who were failing, they just weren't doing work in my class. And it wasn't a reflection on their intelligence exactly. It was, part of it was maybe they couldn't, or they didn't have the emotional resources. And sometimes for me that mapped in like, hey, if you just thought a little bit better, you'd figure out this is in your own self-interest. So I do struggle with it a little bit. Like if I hear kids getting an F, part of me says, what's wrong? And I don't always think what's wrong with the system. My initial thought is what's kid not doing right? So I would mark this one false, but I'm still having a conversation about this, having taught. So.
Right. Well,
one of the things to me is that there's at least 3 components that go into getting a grade.
Yeah.
I think Darlene was talking about some kind of inherent capability that people are trying to assess. There's just what kind of training, what kind of knowledge has been conveyed to this person, what's the background that they had. Have they had good teachers, bad teachers, all that stuff, which is kind of an environmental factor.
Yeah.
The last part to me is a desire. Does a child even desire? And that desire can be missing for many reasons. But if they don't want to, they're not going to. And I think that's what you were talking about. You know that it's capable. Darlene was talking about people, you know that they're bored. But in the end, they don't desire to get an A first. All of that stuff plays together. And people are trying to assess inherent capability in individuals. It's extremely difficult to do that. I don't think that there are any tests which can really define inherent.
And it's really interesting on that point, Lewis, especially there's been a lot of studies in math. If a kid in the United States is able to work a math problem, the peers say, oh, it's because you're so smart. In Asia, if a kid works a math problem, the response is, it's because you worked really hard. And so we have this really different mentality about how it is that you get grades. So you know what a boor I am. When kids said I got an A, I said, oh no, you earned that one. Or I got an F, oh, you earned that.
I'll give you a good example. This is from my life. So I'm an engineer. Math was big to me. I was into all the high level math. So when my daughter went to college, I found it just astounding that she ended up in liberal arts and took calculus as an elective.
An easy A elective.
An easy A elective.
That's good.
I had no interest in any kind of career calculus.
Tim?
We also have to take into consideration the home environment.
Yeah.
I think that plays a big part in this too.
Absolutely. Hardest to do that with your own children. Especially when you're a math teacher and your kid is not making an A. Okay. That actually probably covered us the first 3, talking about A's and success as well. Again, I know that's not true, but emotionally I struggle with it because I did internalize that message as a kid. I did. So if I'm honest, I still have to have that conversation. And if we got graded as clergy people, oh my God, what a mess that would be. I would fall right into that trap. So we do, by the way, we get graded based on our ASA. These are sort of tabs that are very tempted for us to keep up with. And of course, we know better, but it can easily play into us that we can become defensive or rate one another about those kinds of things. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That's really interesting. How many of you would say that's true?
I buy into that one for the most part.
I would say I buy into that.
So I want to say it's true. And then having done lesson 2, I want to say that's false. Beauty is in the eye of God. And so like the beholder may not get it, like we're inherently beautiful to God. So there's maybe a conversation about that, that whole thing about us being God's handiwork and that I don't always like contemporary art, but that's God's expression. That's a really interesting conversation I'm still trying to have with myself.
Mike, that implies, when you say that, it says that there is an absolute beautiful.
Yeah,
If
yeah, and
God,
I think
everything God creates is beautiful, then everything is beautiful.
yeah, I think that's right. I think that's really the invitation, right? I mean, is it Walt? It's not Walt Whitman. Maybe it's yeah, I think it's like Walt Whitman is the one who says like to find the transcendent in a single blade of grass. Like that's the goal. Because I think if you rest on the absolute that everything created is in fact beautiful, then it doesn't, the only thing the beholder does is sees it or not, but it inherently is. I think I like that viewpoint, even though I've got to make a lot of adjustment to live that out.
Doesn't mean I like it all.
Well, that's right. I think that's right. And I'll tell you that I can recognize there are certain things that I know. Well, that's tough. I have a hard time. Usually when I say beautiful, I mean, I like it. And so maybe that's the shift is to say, I don't have to like it to agree that it's beautiful. And sometimes we get, I think, confused between liking something and loving it, and between finding it beautiful and liking it, or it's pleasing to me, so it's beautiful. I've seen some really ugly and disturbing things that were in fact beautiful, even though they weren't pleasing. Yeah. Okay. The poverty one's interesting, right? If you're poorer than others, that's a source of shame, even if you work really hard. I mean, I think we know better than that, but those are maybe things to sit through. So I'm guessing most of these showed up as false for you. But again, I think if I were a spiritual director, the invitation would be to come back and revisit, like, how do these statements wash over your being and not just what does your head do? Because I know all the right answers, but I also know that when I get on a bus in Compton that is full of Black passengers, I have a non-cognitive response to that. I know that about myself. And I have to either get off the bus or I have to sit there. And if I sit there, I have to do something with that emotional response. And so, I think these kinds of cultural programming is really worth us continuing to think about how susceptible are we. I mean, I'll just be honest. I was the valedictorian, and I really, really measured a lot of my self-value on grades, and really believed that going to college was really important, and doing well in college was really important, not just so that I had a particular options available, but just for my self-worth. So it's really hard for me to step back from that, and really important for me to step back from that. I know to do that, but that doesn't mean my being is going with me. I hope that makes sense. This is why I like this curriculum as an opportunity to just see how it really washes over us. Okay, I'm going to show us a video now that is. I'm going to make sure I show you the right video. Yeah, this is a video from the Diocese of Atlanta, so I can't send it to you to see. Like in a link, so we'll just do our best with it here. And it's right there. Internalized depression.
My journey of internalized depression started at a really young age. I remember being the only Black student up until 3rd grade. And so that started the thoughts in my head of, I didn't know when I first understood that being Black was bad, but I understood that I was different, and the way I was different seemed to be wrong. And so I remember in middle school that there was clearly a white table and a Black table. And even though I would sit at the Black table, sometimes I would actively try to sit at the white table, because instinctively I knew that my life would be better if I sat at the white table. And so once I started to be accepted into the white community, it started this long journey of me trying so hard to assimilate to white culture. And so that began me trying to just denounce everything that was Black culture, and I tried to deny everything about me that was Black. And I remember actually in middle school, one of my teachers got, one of my classmates called me an Oreo, and my teacher overheard and got really upset and made my classmate apologize to me. And I couldn't understand why, because I took it as a compliment. I literally thought that was okay for someone to say I was Black on the outside but white on the inside. And so it just started this whole deep spiral of me essentially like hating myself, but not even knowing I hated myself, because internally I was just feeding myself these messages, or I was just seeing in society. I didn't really watch movies that had like predominantly Black characters, or I didn't really read books that had I didn't really know of any. And so all of the characters in my life were predominantly white. And so even internally in my head, I was white, even though like on the outside I was clearly Black. And so there was just such a disassociation with who I actually was. And because my parents are immigrants from Guyana, which is in South America, and it was so much easier to be disassociated with Black culture, because I was like, oh, I'm not really Black, I'm Guyanese, I'm West Indian, and I could use that as a way to kind of, again, disassociate myself from being Black. And then also, I think, especially in the Black community, hair is a big deal. And because my hair was a different texture, people would ask me, like, what are you? Where are you from? All this stuff. And so it would also instill, like, a pride thing in me, because I was like, oh, they can see I'm different. They can see I'm not really Black. And so then I would also get these messages of like, wow, you speak really well. Wow, you sound so polite, or you speak so white, or you act white. And again, I thought those were all compliments, because I told that was, if you wanted to be ahead in society, like that's how you should act. And it wasn't until after college when God met me in a moment of me realizing, like, my whole life, like, I essentially hated myself without even knowing, like, how much I hated myself. And so it was really painful to bring up all those things, because I didn't even know. But thankfully, God is so gracious, and He instilled in me, and He was speaking to me, you're beautiful the way I made you to be, and your skin is beautiful, and He delights in who I am and in the color of my skin. It's not something to be ashamed of, but something to be proud of. And so God started me on this journey of what it means to love myself, and to really start to look for those people who are strong people of color, and just really diving into that God has made us all unique, and that we are beautiful no matter what, and no matter what our skin color is, like, God made us that way. And so it's a lot. Racial reconciliation is a lifelong journey of going into those painful things, and especially as a person of color, as someone who actively tried to, disassociate from my Blackness, and to dive into all those painful memories of people saying things to me and how wrong I felt or bad I felt. It's hard, but it's worth it, because people really don't know what the Black experience is like. And so as a person of color, it's important to, even though this is my personal experience, and my personal experience is not the same as another person of color's experience, but it is important that I share how I grew up, things that I've gone through, because so that way people can understand that the Black experience is different, and that we need to be able to go into those painful parts so that way beauty can come from the ashes. And as I'm going into being a missionary in Italy, where again I'll be a minority, it's important that I hold steadfast to my identity in Christ and who God has made me to be, but also to still hold true to like that my culture and who I am as a woman of color is just as important in spreading the gospel as is sharing as his love. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, I want to, if I can, there's a second one they want us to watch, but I want to see if you had any reaction to that video, if there's anything that really struck a chord in you from her sharing. Darlene?
I had a really strong emotional reaction. I hurt for her. Her self-hatred, she's growing into loving herself, but the original self-hatred just tore my heart in two. I see this self-hatred in a lot of people I've worked with, not only unhealthy people, but healthy people. Mm-hmm. And this is where the intersectionality of this series comes in for me. Yeah. Especially with LGBTQ people. I have one particular experience with a particular intern who was lesbian, and she was smart, she was basically healthy, but she could not even bear to say the word lesbian. And when I would say that word, she would cringe because her definition of lesbian was society's definition. She had been taunted with that word or hurt every time she heard that word said negatively. So part of my work with her was to say that word over and over in a positive context in order to help her redefine what that word meant. And this young woman we just saw was going through that same process of learning how to redefine her color, redefine her Blackness. And there's a process that we go through with that of Black used to be a rock we would throw at people. And Black people have taken that and embraced it and have redefined it as Black is beautiful. And so there's a process that we go through of redefining who we are. Pardon me, I just really had a strong emotional reaction to that.
Well, I'm really, really grateful for you sharing. Susan?
I agree with Darlene. I had a very emotional response to what she had to say. And I don't know how you could not have an emotional response, because you could see how devastating it was to her. But I think, like Darlene says, that I can't know what it means to self-hate myself as a Black, but I think white people and brown people, I think everybody can have that reaction to something in their own life. And so I empathize with her.
Yeah, to me, that seems like the real opportunity is actually to connect to a script of internalized depression. And I think you can say like, hey, any internalized depression you have as a white person is going to be categorically less important than what a person of color has to bear. But I don't think that's right regarding empathy and compassion. And so I think, honestly, if the numbers are right, at least 90% of women have inherent body shame, and that's internalized depression, because that came from outside, it didn't come from inside, right? The message that you're not good enough looking, or your body doesn't function well enough, or your hair isn't curly enough or straight enough. Again, that number 90% is a pretty strong number, right? And so when you're not comfortable in your own skin, I really think that's what she's talking about. And whether we can understand, I think, what it's like to be a Black person or not, I don't think we can. We can, in fact, have empathy and hopefully compassion for not being comfortable in our own skin. So imagine that video is not just her talking about how she hated that she was identified in such a way, but that there's a voice inside of you. And maybe you're not one of those people. I am. I definitely have some internalized oppression that came from outside of me that I wasn't able to resist all the time anyway. So, you know, particularly in my childhood, there were voices there about how I was supposed to look or how I was supposed to behave or what my grades were supposed to be or what my self-worth was predicated on. And if I can listen to those voices and have that as an empathy point with other people, I don't know what their experience is like, but I do know what it's like to suffer from internalized depression. I don't have to feel exactly like them to tap into that feeling. And again, that's the difference between empathy and sympathy and the basis for compassion, I think. So I had a strong reaction to Darlene. Again, like, I know what it feels like to not be comfortable in your own skin. And to take part in helping change that for other people, that's the compassion move. So the empathy is about, hey, I'm going there with you. And the compassion is, what will I do about it now? Sometimes it's hard to figure out what the compassionate response is. I want to show another video, this other video that they put together for us. And this is really, it's a biblical story about internalized oppression. Well, let's see, what I need to do is get out of this one and go show you this one. Okay.
Jacob was born grasping his twin brother's heel, and so they named him Jacob, which means he grasped the heel. Unfortunately, grasping someone's heel was also an idiom for tripping someone up or deceiving someone, taking advantage of them. And names were very important in the Bible. They were that person's identity. So every day of his life, the message was reinforced to Jacob that he was a deceiver. That's who he was. Nothing else, no more, no less. Jacob started believing that message. And when he believed it, he started living it. He cheated his brother out of his birthright. He deceived his father into giving him the better blessing. He broke those relationships until he had to flee. He ran to his uncle Laban, where he met his match. They took turns deceiving and cheating each other until that relationship was broken. Jacob found himself caught between two people he had wronged. He was fleeing from his uncle, whom he had wronged, and he had no place to go except towards his brother, whom he had also wronged. The night before, he knew he had to face his brother. He was struggling with the choices he made and who he was. God met him there, and they wrestled together with who he was. And God ended up telling him, "You're not Jacob, the deceiver, but Israel, someone who wrestles and struggles, sure, but who does that with God." And that became a major understanding of his identity. I'm not just Israel, the man, but Israel, the nation. When he believed the message from others about who he wasn't whole. And he lived into that negative message. When he believed the message from God about who he was able to have the right relationships with God and with others. It transformed his life, his sense of his own identity, his sense of value. He became a whole, transformed person. The same goes for us. When we believe the message that others send about what makes us valuable, we live into that and we pursue the wrong things. But when we believe the message God gives us about who we are, it is freeing and it makes us whole. We all believe false messages about what makes us valuable, but in particular, society sends a message that people of color are not as valuable as white people. And when people of color believe those messages, it's called internalized oppression. They believe the false messages that they are not as valuable. You can see an example of this in the film called A Girl Like Me.
So it's interesting the way they work that into Bible study, because the question is whether or not the meaning Jacob as heel grabber, as thief, came after the story or before. It's a tough business, but there is that study, right, that shows up in Freakonomics that names have a strong influence on how you view yourself. And of course, Jacob competes with his brother from the beginning as to who's going to be born first, and he loses. He comes out literally grabbing a heel, and then spends the rest of his life grabbing other people's heels, including God. So Israel means tries to cheat God. Interesting name for people to say, like, hey, we're the God cheaters. And that's our heritage, to be honest. It's not really like a great thing. The question is whether we should be proud of that or like repent from that, honestly. So I don't know what you think about the Jacob story, but it's interesting. In the Bible, your name is who you are, and so Jacob is a thief. And when he goes to deal with his brother, I'm going to actually disagree with her. I'm not convinced he's interested in being reconciled, because since he's a cheat, he probably thinks everybody else is, which means since he can't forgive, he can't trust anybody else can either. That's my read of the story, which is different from hers. But I think it takes us to a similar place. If we don't do the internal work, then we can't do it. I mean, what's required is some transformation, not only in the way we think, but in how we behave. So that's part of what we've got to do, I think. She led up to another video that I'm going to show you. It's a little bit shorter. It's called A Girl Like Me. We're a little bit video heavy, but here it comes.
Every black female has a big butt and big boobs. Loud, obnoxious. Go. Light skin being more attractive than dark skin. We're not smart. We're this way, we're that way. And a lot of times we have to prove ourselves as not being true. At a young age, I already knew the standards for a girl like me. As I become older, they become more obvious. You have to have permed hair, relaxed hair, straight hair or like blonde hair, long waves or something. And if it's natural, that's good hair. Like bad hair is hair you have to relax because it's kinky. Like it's not like a pale and a half, like natural hairstyle. Or like if they are natural, they have to be like the curly head, like black girl, or something that looks mixed or something. I remember when I first started wearing my hair natural, at first my mom was okay with it. And she thought it looked nice. And then after like the second day, she was like, oh, stop that. She was like, you're starting to look African. I was like, well, I am African. And that really pissed me off. There are standards that are imposed upon us. Like, you're prettier if you're light skinned. I knew people in the past that just wanted to be light skinned, not for any particular reason, because they love themselves. I mean, they love themselves except for, the color of their skin. Like my siblings are all lighter than me. And my mom, she's dark skinned, but she's lighter than me. So I noticed and I was like, hey, how come I'm the darkest? And everybody else is so light. And I don't know. Since I was younger, I also considered being lighter as a form of beauty, or beautiful, more beautiful than being dark skinned. So I used to think of myself as being ugly because I was dark skinned. I
knew people who actually like went out there and got, you know, bleaching cream and everything. They actually like laid in the tub, like poured like capfuls of bleach into it just so they could like see if their skin would get lighter. But yeah, my aunt that lives in Honduras, she basically started using skin bleaching cream when she was about 25, and she started her oldest daughter on it when she was about 11, and then she has an even younger daughter that was about 6 when she started using the skin bleaching cream on her. I've seen people say that I would never marry a dark-skinned man because, you know, because I don't want that in my gene pool.
On the other hand, like some girls have their issues too. We've been called high yellow, conceited, house nigga. I feel like both sides have their issues.
I guess I sort of felt like there was not any attention towards me because of maybe my skin color or because my hair was kinky or just simply that. Or even when I was younger, like say there was I don't know, a doll. I used to have a lot of dolls, but most of them were just white dolls with long straight hair that I would comb, and I would be like, oh, I wish I was just like this Barbie doll.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with Black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you like to play with? That one? I like to play with this. And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll? He's white. And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you and why does that look bad? Because it's black. And why do you think that's a nice doll? Because she's white. And can you give me the doll that looks like you? 15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll.
Our ancestors came to this country and they were pretty much ripped out of their culture. You know, they couldn't speak their language. They couldn't, you know, they couldn't be themselves. They had to be like what everybody else told them to be. When you don't know where you're from and you don't know what country you're from, all you know is basically you're from Africa. That's all you're given. I feel like it brings on like a lot of ignorance and it builds a lot of anger. I've seen it build a lot of anger in a lot of Black young females. Like, I don't know, they feel like because they feel like they have a right to disown any kind of, you know, African roots.
I think for a Black girl in general, it's like you're missing a piece of you, you know? And for me, yeah, it's like, oh, I don't have any actual heritage, not heritage, but culture. Like, I know I'm from Africa, but you know, the different countries in Africa have their different cultures, their different morals, their different values. And not knowing that just it sort of keeps us at a loss. And I feel like we're busy searching for it while everybody else in society is throwing their ideas and what they believe we should be at us. But, you know, personally, we know that's not what we should be, but we're gonna take it because we don't know exactly what it is that we should be because we don't really know where we came from.
That may have been painful to see, and I don't know how acquainted you are with the Brown versus Board of Education study that was represented there. So let me just ask you. Was there anything you learned from that video you didn't know Or did you have a reaction to hearing the negative kinds of messages people of color receive every day?
I thought it was heartbreaking, especially for those children. I just wanted to cry and hug them all.
Kathy, was there one part more than others that really was the heartbreak for you? Or that you identified with more?
When they got the black dolls, like they were bad.
Yeah.
It's not pretty or not nice, but bad.
Yeah, it's really tough to hear children say something like that. Susan and then Graciela.
One of the things I thought it was very sad, but one of the things that struck me is the young woman who really wanted to know what country in Africa she came from and what culture that was. You know, my background, I've done the ancestry DNA, and you know, I'm Northern England and Northern Europe, but to me, my culture and my background is American. And to me, it is just very sad that she doesn't see herself as American. But she sees herself as coming from, you know, a different culture, and that's what's important to her. So I wish we all could see each other as brothers and sisters in America.
Thank you. Graciela?
Well, my comment was simply, this is video that I've seen before. It's an older, I think it was used back in the 70s, 80s. But even seeing it again now after all these years, it's still a very painful thing to watch, and you know that it's real, and there's probably Black girls today that may still feel this way, because especially when you look at today's times and the problems we're having, so many things are put down towards those people that are of different color. And it's just kind of, it was a sad, God, it's too bad it's still like that. And I love the part which somebody mentioned, that she wanted to know the country. You know, it's like for Hispanics, Spanish speakers, you know, there's a whole Mexico and all of South America. You could come from any of those parts. A lot of Spanish speakers down there, and Spain.
What's really interesting in my experience with that, Graciela, is that, forgive me for saying this, but it seems like the average approach from white people is, oh, you're Hispanic, you're Mexican.
Yes, oh yes.
And oh, you're Black, you're African.
Right.
And particularly when I read Ibram Findi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, the question, oh, where are you from, is one of those questions that the home group gets to ask. Nobody would ever ask me that question in America, where am I from? Because I'm white. But it's a white question to say, you don't look like me, so you came here from somewhere else. Right. So where are you from? I'm from Africa. Yeah, but what kind of African people are you? In some ways, it's like this internalized oppression question, because for me, I don't have to deal with the heritage question. I took the 23andMe, sure, so I know that I'm mostly from the British Isles, but I don't have like a tartan or like a family quake that's been passed down from generation to generation, or some sort of like lederhosen that my Opa wore when he was in Bavaria. Like, I don't have any of that stuff because I don't have to have that stuff, right? I can look at somebody who's of a different color or behavior that's outside the quote unquote dominant norm and say, well, yeah, sure, you're American, but where are you really from? And that's the power I have as a white person. Oh yeah, okay, well, you came here from Africa, but where are you really from? And then I've made somebody homeless. I don't know if that makes sense. And it's a huge deal. And I often think like, wow, it'd be really cool if I had some kind of cultural heritage or some kind of ethnic heritage forgetting, right? That's been normalized, because 100 years ago, being from the British Isles was not necessarily great, depending how much from Ireland I was. Because Irish people were viewed as subhuman, actually. So it's interesting how this sort of has rolled out, but how it's rolled out in favor of white folks like myself. Tim, you were going to say something.
Well, and don't forget the Asian Americans.
Yeah.
And the people from India. I mean, we all ask that same. I mean, because we associate Africa with Black people, people from that speak Spanish is coming from Mexico. You're right. We label people. We, the home team, would label everybody else.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, having worked at a school that had a huge international student population, there is this really interesting thing where it's like, oh, you're Asian. And there's such a blur there because, I mean, speaking for the average Asian experience, as I've been told, a Korean person does not want to be called Chinese or Japanese. In fact, the average Korean person has contempt for both of those countries because of the history of oppression. Korea was in the middle between two empires and was constantly invaded by one or the other. And Koreans look nothing like Chinese people or Japanese people ethnically. They just happen to be neighbors, but there's huge genetic difference. And to be lumped into that category is extremely insulting for the Korean students that I knew. The other thing that is interesting to hear is, and this happens particularly to international students, most of our Asian students, whether they were from China, Vietnam, Japan, or Korea, those were our dominant countries represented at the school I taught at, they would go home and they were called bananas. They were yellow on the outside and white on the inside.
Oh my.
And so they didn't belong in America because they weren't from here. And when they went home, they'd lost their home security because they didn't stay there. And they had the privilege of being able to leave. And that was great, except they lost some of their core acceptance and identity. And a lot of, you could say, well, that was so they could get into an American college, and that was going to be better for them. But again, to think about the costs of doing that for a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old, they're not always readily apparent. Okay, just to transition, we could do this on Google, and I just wonder what you think we would find if we just started typing words into the image search engine, like smart people. Maybe that's worth having a look at. I'll share my screen with you. This is what smart people look like according to Google. Mostly Albert Einstein.
Yes, mostly.
But also a couple of white women.
Oh, that's very telling.
If you scroll down, you'll see Steve Jobs. Now there is a person of color here, but that's about it, right? What do you think we would find if I put in CEO?
Steve Jobs.
Well, again, we're seeing one person of color here. Here's, yeah, mostly looks like, most like we're seeing white people and white men, right? Mostly.
Steve Jobs, something powerful white man.
What do you think happens if I put in beautiful people?
Blondes and blue eyes.
It's a little bit encouraging, actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's huh.
There's even people with like scars and tattoos showing up. And somehow Marilyn Manson showed up, which I don't, that's interesting. But there are some people of color that show up, right?
Sure.
All right. What happens, do you think, if I put welfare recipients? I get some graphs and cartoons. So maybe that wasn't the right choice. Well, here I'm seeing some people of color.
How about poor people, Mike?
That's good. Let's do poor people. Yeah, mostly seeing the brown people or the Indian people. Yeah, that's right. Hey, maybe we should try, Lewis, to see what rich people look like. Yeah, it looks like the only person of color is a bodyguard, right? Otherwise, looks like everybody is white. How about criminals? Well, I got some surprises there. I got some yeah.
That's funny.
Actually, mostly white.
Looks like it. Yeah. Well, what if I do drug dealer? Let's see what we get there.
There he is, showing up again.
That's so weird. Looks like it's a mixed bag. Drug dealers get us a mixed bag.
Is that Trump?
Yeah.
Trump shows up everywhere.
Yeah, maybe. Let's see what happens, what kind of images we get if I just look for black people. Yeah, Donald Trump is there too. That's interesting. So I think what's interesting that you could do just for fun is you absolutely could continue to do like a Google search and see what the #1 images come up with. But I do think there's an interesting exercise you could do. And again, I think this is not something just to be done in your head, because you can over intellectualize this. But let me ask you, if you would, to just try this on with me. Just close your eyes, and I'm going to say a word, and you're probably going to get an image. And then I would love to hear what your image looks like. The word is firefighter. Okay. What's a firefighter look like, Susan? The image that came in your head.
An attractive, brawny white guy.
Thank you. Darlene, how about you?
My image was immediately male, but my brain went, no.
Yeah.
And I shifted that image immediately.
Okay.
The female.
Yeah. Kathy, how about you?
I thought the same thing, a big husky white male guy, and then I thought of a friend of ours' daughter who is a volunteer firefighter.
Ah, good. Graciela?
No, I thought of the white man, the tall, strong white man.
Yeah. Lewis?
I had the same reaction Kathy did.
Okay. Tim?
We have a friend whose daughter is a firefighter, and that's what popped into my mind first.
Yeah, because you knew somebody. That's interesting. I mean, I think most of the firefighters I know are male, so in general, for me, that's a white man. And I have to use my brain to say it doesn't have to be. And it's really interesting because I was one of the kids, you know, when I was young in the 80s is when we were pushing really hard that they're not firemen, they're firefighters. And the question is, what do we still imagine? I wonder if you'd have a different immediate image if I said police officer.
For me,
Nope.
Kayla.
Say again.
Kayla Sullivan.
Absolutely. Now I can think of her. if I think just a second, there's actually another 2 female officers in this neighborhood. But I do think I immediately go to white man as police officer.
Right.
And then I have to say, what else?
My experience was, my image was influenced strongly by my interaction with Kayla and my connection with her.
Yes.
So there's that example of how interactions, relationships can influence the images that come in our head and our behavior.
Yeah. Susan?
Well, I immediately thought of the daughter of a parishioner who is a police officer, and I happen to know her, and so that was my first thought.
Great. Graciela?
Yeah, I saw Hispanic because I've got 3 brothers who have been in some form of police work, and so I immediately thought about one of them, and Hispanic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, the officer I'm closest to in the neighborhood is Hispanic, or is Latinx. But I don't know that he necessarily, nor would I, immediately map him as Latinx. That's the interesting part about it.
So what does Latinx mean?
It's a more comprehensive word than Hispanic.
Okay.
And the X at the end, instead of saying Latino, it applies to women as well, because a Latino is a man by linguistic definition.
Okay.
I still have trouble saying that, the Latinx. I still.
Yeah, and what's funny, right? And this is true. It's true in a lot of languages, right? But if you have 100 women and 1 man in a group, you refer to the group in the masculine. And that's where Latino comes from. And I think that's why Latinx is saying, like, no, that's why we're putting the X there, is to be inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So Mike, why is Hispanic not the same as Latinx?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Lewis. I feel like I used to know the answer to that. Does somebody else know the answer?
Maybe I'll have to ask my daughter.
She probably would know on the cuff. Tim, what were you were going to say something?
Oh, well, yes. When you said police officer, because of everything that's been happening, the first thing I thought about was a corrupt white man.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Let me ask you this one, and you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you, if I said poor American, would come up with a person of color as an image instead of just a white person? Yeah, what's interesting about it is you would be statistically correct if you did that, right? Because the overall poverty rate in America is something like 16%. The white poverty rate is about 9%. The Black poverty rate is 24%.
Wow.
So 2.5 times higher. What's really interesting is the average net worth of a white person is something like $100,000 compared to $5,000 for a Black person.
Oh
my gosh.
So it's interesting that sometimes we gravitate toward an image and it's stereotypical, but there could be reasons for that as well. How about criminal? Do any of you, I actually feel like I'm pretty color neutral on the criminal population. What if I said dangerous criminal? Does that do anything different for you? Tim?
Yes, African American.
So, what's really interesting is that 40% of the prison population is white, and white people make up 60% of the national population. 40% of the prison population is Black, and Black people make up 13% of the US population. So there's the same number of white people and black people in jail, but there's a sixth the number of black people, if that makes sense. And it's really interesting to think about what kind of crimes. If I said serial killer, how many of you think of a black person? If I say embezzler pyramid scheme, how many of you think of a black person? If I say gangbanger, how many of you think of a black person? Yeah, I mean, so it's really interesting to think, if you parse it out, where our imagery tends to go, and sometimes it's really worth chasing the data. What about, this is the toughest one, right, is the word welfare. I don't want to ask you if you identify with one over the other, but let me ask you this. What do you think is the largest group of welfare recipients? White, Black, Latinx, Asian, or other? I know that's a big group.
I would say white.
Yeah, you would be right. 40% of welfare recipients are white, 25% Black. But when we use the word welfare, we're talking about specifically something like Medicaid or WIC or food stamps. And what's really interesting that we considered even way back in the first is to consider what welfare is, right? And so is giving somebody a home loan, is giving somebody the GI Bill welfare? Is it an entitlement, or is it something that they earned? The reason that question, I think, becomes important is if white people were given the GI Bill and black people weren't, as the data is shown, to buy homes after World War II, then the question is that welfare or not? Tim?
When you said that, I thought of African Americans, I thought of Caucasians, but Hispanics and Asians, I did not put into that group.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I think part of race in America, and I really felt this in Atlanta and was really confused, like I said, moving to San Diego, where there is a very small percentage of African American or Black population, right? It's a really high Latinx population in San Diego, is what we tend to think when we think about race. We normally think about white, Black. And we're starting to actually have some consideration about Latinx and what it's like to be Asian, but I almost feel like this is a feeling, I don't have a data for this, but I think the feeling, race conjures up white, Black in America first, and then other groups second, unless you belong to one of those groups, and then it might show up for you first. I don't know if that's true.
I imagine that depends on which group you fall into. So
yeah, I think that's probably right.
You probably have a different perspective.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right.
And Mike, it was interesting when you said poor people. My mind immediately went to the people in Appalachia. But I grew up in Ohio, close to the West Virginia border.
Yeah.
And to me, those people in the mountains were the poor.
Yeah, and statistically they are, by the way.
The same reaction that Kathy and I had when we grew up in the South, Florida. And that the Black people that I knew, I didn't think of as poor. They weren't rich by any means. I didn't think of them as.
Yeah, thank you. I hope more than anything, just kind of touching on this is that it's an interesting way to explore where your brain and where your gut immediately takes you. And then I think that's really good to do, and then think, well, why is it doing that? And I appreciate what you're saying about Appalachia, right? Because I really identify as being a Kentuckian. A lot of Kentuckians went to Ohio because they were jobs. And if you read the book Hillbilly Elegy, it talks about that, about how they kind of were living between both places and were nowhere at the same time. And I have, Susan, a lot of images of Appalachian poverty, but I've never lived in an inner city. In inner city poverty, it looks really different than Appalachian poverty, even though it's poverty, right? There's not just one kind. But there's what I am most proximal to in my family identity and where I've been. I've been on service project trips to Appalachia. Well, I have done service projects in the inner city, but they weren't in people's homes. They were in community centers. So it looks different to me, and it feels different. I don't know if it's helpful to think through, and here we're kind of falling short on time. I would show you another video from White Like Me that talks about whether things like deducting mortgage interest or subsidized student loan are welfare or not. You have to make up your own decisions about those. But I do think it's worth thinking about how we would respond in an honest, loving way to somebody saying to us, Black people are taking advantage of welfare, or people of color are criminals. And I don't know if you have any thoughts that you're willing to share off the cuff, or if that might be something you'd be willing to start with next time. Again, how would we respond in an honest and loving way? My own reaction is the criminals I know best are the ones I'm related to. Because I got a couple of those. Really just only a couple. But those are the ones I know best, and they're white like me. Okay, what I'm going to do is close our session with prayer, like I said I would, and maybe then I'll start next time. Oh, Kathy, please.
Let's look up the difference between Hispanic and Latinx.
What'd you come up with, Lewis?
So Latinx includes Portuguese descendants. Like
Instead
Brazil.
of just being from Spain. Yeah.
That makes sense. Thanks, Louis.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm grateful for our time together. I really appreciate your being willing to meet and to think through this together. And I'm looking forward to hearing how we might be honest and loving next week as our starter. So let me close with prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, who reached across ethnic boundaries between Samaritans, Romans, and Jews, who offered fresh sight to the blind and freedom to captives, help us to break down the barriers in our community and in our hearts. Enable us to see the reality of racism and bigotry without and within, and free us to challenge and uproot it from ourselves, our society, and our world. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. See you soon.